Welcome to Conversations with KidCare Canada. I'm your host, Estelle Paget, and in a few minutes we're going to be talking about reading to babies, to toddlers, and to young children. With us in the studio is someone who's eminently qualified to talk about all this, Daphne Macnaughton. Hi, Daphne. Welcome.
Thank you, Estelle.
It's lovely to have you here.
And to be here.
In a few minutes, we're going to talk about who you are. But first, I asked you to think about a key message for viewers. Were you able to do that?
I was. A key message is that reading is a shared experience that helps build relationship with children. And that relationship, together with reading to them early and often, has a strong positive impact on their present life and their future lives.
I can't wait to talk more about this. But first, let's find out a little bit about you.
Well, most of all, I describe myself as a granny these days. I have 9 grandchildren and another one on the way. I also run a children's picture book recycling project called 1000 by 5. In my working life, before retirement, I was a teacher, school administrator, a district consultant, a person who was seconded to the Ministry of Education, and I've worked with prospective teachers at UVic and leadership students at Royal Roads University.
My goodness. I did say you were qualified to be here.
Thank you.
Going back to when you were in the classroom, could you tell on day one whether or not a child had been exposed to books?
Absolutely. For many years, I watched very, very carefully on that first day of school. And those children who were familiar with books went straight to the bookshelves. They looked at the pictures, they talked with their friends, they found their favorite books. There were some children every year who had either no experience with books or very limited experience with books, and they simply didn't know what to do when the teacher announced story time. They didn't know that the book carried the story, not the teacher, not the pictures. So from the beginning, there was a great difference in their capacity for learning from books.
In a minute, we're going to be looking at a video that summarizes some of your key points about the importance of early reading and talking to children. And that's going to be with Tom Boyce. So we'll see if we can take a look at that video now.
Great.
It's important to hold, talk to, and touch babies because babies, especially young babies, young children, are absorbing in those first few years of life all of these varieties of experience. And we know that their brains, the circuitry in their brains, the architecture of their brains, are really built sort of from the ground up. And these early relationships of interacting with their mother and their father, being touched, being spoken to, being read to, all of these experiences fundamentally affect the growth and the maturation of circuitry, of connections within the brain that then last a lifetime. So the child's ability to learn, to develop relationships, to respond to the world in a variety of ways are really built from these early experiences of what we think of as kind of serve and return, of this two-way street between a parent and a baby or a young child.
Daphne, many of the researchers that we work with, like Tom Boyce, talk about serve and return. Do you know what that is, and why is that useful when reading to a child?
Well, it's useful when reading to a child, useful when talking with a child too, of course. I like the term because it indicates the back and forth. So, for example, if a child notices a cat and says, "Oh, titty-tat," I would say as the parent, yes, that's a kitty cat. Can you see the cat run? Whatever. And so what I'm doing is I'm affirming the child's approximation and expanding on the language.
Without the child feeling that he or she is being corrected in any way.
Exactly. And so the same kind of thing happens when we're reading a book. As we notice pictures in the book and the child is expressing what it is that he or she knows, I go through the same kind of process. I affirm their approximation and extend the language.
Would you show us how to do that?
I don't know that I can do that with one of these, but let's try. So, for example, if this was a children's book, I might say to the baby or the little toddler, oh, look, there's the baby's mouth. Where's your mouth? And so baby would point to the mouth and I would say, yes, that's your mouth. Can you see the baby's eyes? And so we're involved in a back and forth conversation.
Yes. And then what would you do when you're going through the book? How would you go about that?
Well, that depends on the age of the child. There are some books that can be read to babies, to toddlers, to young children, which young children will then begin to read to themselves. So over and over again, we're reading the same book, but always in different ways. So in the beginning, with the very youngest children, we might just look at the pictures, and I might just talk about the pictures with the baby and play those kinds of games. With a toddler, I might read some of the text, but not the more complicated words. With an older child, I would read the whole story and begin to engage in conversation about things that we have done that might be similar or what they're imagining. So depending upon the level of a child, a book can be read in many ways.
That's lovely. Thank you, Daphne.
You're welcome.
So how do you feel when you're reading to a child? What kind of state are you in?
I'm in the kind of state that your researchers talk about, calm and alert. My telephone's turned off, the screen's turned off, and my full attention is on the child or the children that I'm reading to. And their full attention is on the book, on the story, not on me, but on the experience we're sharing together.
And yet, with a very young child, you say that it's not on you, but what do little children tend to do when you're reading to them? Where do they like to sit?
They like to be on the lap, or they like to be side by side with us. And I think your researchers have shown that that kind of proximity, that closeness, if it's skin to skin or side by side, is very calming, not only for the baby, but for the adult too.
It can be surprising for many people to learn that it's never too young to read to a baby.
No, it's not.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. I have seen people reading to newborns. I've had a chance to read to newborns. They're not interested in the words, but they are interested in the sound of our voice, in the cadence of the language, in the sing-song and rhyming in the text. They respond with their attentiveness.
As in all things, timing is important. Is there a special time to read to a baby?
I don't know that there's a special time other than they should probably be fed. They should probably be dry. They should probably have all of their other needs met so that they're calm and comfortable. And so after their nap, before bedtime, in the bath, there are lots of times and places for reading to children.
So Dr. Janet Worker agrees with you, and we're going to take a look at a video clip where she talks about the quiet, alert state.
Newborn babies are listening to the world around them even when they're asleep. They're learning about language, they're learning about familiar voices, and you can detect that in a sleeping newborn. Mothers and fathers can know that when they are able to make their baby comfortable, they're fed, they're clothed, they're feeling safe, that they can get into that quiet, alert state, and that's when they learn about the world around them.
So that's what we could do when we're reading to babies. When we're reading to toddlers and older children, Does that change?
It changes. We, as I mentioned through the demonstration, we would focus more on the text than the pictures, and begin to enhance the vocabulary, begin to ask questions, but again, we're involved in that back and forth exchange of information through the story.
Do you find that reading to a child is a way to help a child calm down?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. When we calm down to take the time and give them our full attention, we demonstrate to them that they're the most important thing at the moment, not the phone ringing, not any other possible distraction.
This is lovely. We're going to be moving to break very soon. I wonder if you could just tell us, before we do that, very quickly, about this amazing literacy project that you run.
Thank you. I don't run the project alone. I work with a wonderful group of volunteers on the Saanich Peninsula. We collect books from the community, clean them, sort them, package them as gifts, and give them back to the community in gift bags through food banks, public health nurses, Strong Start centers, kindergarten classes, family serving agencies. In all, on the peninsula, we've collected over 110,000 books for redistribution since 2008.
Now, not everybody is lucky enough to live in Victoria, where this project is very active. Is there something that people who are living elsewhere on the island or elsewhere in the province can do to ensure that their children get to hear 1,000 books read to them before they're 5 years old?
There are public libraries. There are often community programs such as Parent Child Mother Goose. There are parent drop-in programs. There are Strong Start centers all across the province.
This is terrific. We're going to move to a break right now, and when we come back, we're going to continue the conversation with Daphne Macnaughton.
A child's early years are foundational for lifelong mental and physical health. KidCare Canada Society is a charitable organization incorporated in the province of British Columbia. We seek to empower families to raise their children to be socially and emotionally healthy, and ensure families and those who support them have easy access to relevant, current research at no cost to the end user. Our appealing videos, now being captioned in various languages, feature world-renowned experts and real families. To access these videos and other free resources, log on to KidCareCanada.org.
We hope you will check out some of those resources, but right now in the studio with us is Daphne Macnaughton. Daphne, can you tell us some other reasons why it's beneficial for children to be read to?
Well, in addition to the relationship building, the stress reducing, the attunement to story, kids learn that stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They learn that words go together to form sentences. They learn a lot about the world around them, both real and imaginary kinds of experiences. Some storybooks provide opportunity for learning empathy, for experience that we would call vicarious experience. They may never have the experience, but they can learn about it. Children get so much information from books, and again from the back and forth conversation we have with them during the reading, and the conversations that may come up later at the dinner table.
Do you ever see that children take what they've learned when you've been reading to them and use it in another context?
Oh, absolutely. One of my grandchildren at 3.5 came for a visit with me, and we read a beautiful story called Chrysanthemum. Chrysanthemum is a little mouse character who's born into a loving family, And she is declared absolutely perfect and given this beautiful 13-letter long name. She loves her name, her family loves her name, until she goes to school and is teased because it's the name of a flower and because she can't fit her name on her name tag. And so from being absolutely perfect, she becomes a little girl who feels, or a little mouse who feels absolutely dreadful about her name. And that refrain, absolutely dreadful, is repeated and repeated throughout the story. She feels absolutely dreadful about school. She just ends up feeling absolutely dreadful about herself. So my grandson and I read this story, and then we went for our neighborhood walk. And as we were walking along, he noticed some litter on the ground, and he said, "Oh, Granny, that's absolutely dreadful." There you have it. Right.
Vocabulary that they're learning in a story can be transferred to other contexts. And I've actually seen the same thing with one of my little grandsons who talked about his dada being cross. And that word cross, I know, came from reading a Rupert book to him because Rupert Bear is British.
Exactly.
So Janet Worker says something very similar about reading to little ones. And she talks about other things that are advantages for children, just the physicality of knowing how a book works. And I wonder, we'll just see if we can take a look at that video clip right now.
The other things you're doing are perfect as well. I mean, you read to him, so that gives him richer input than he might hear just in those on-face kinds of interactions. At the same time, teaching him about books, that they're fun, that they're wonderful. Even the experience of a book going from left to right in our culture, and that it involves turning pages, is something that children don't know if they don't have that kind of exposure.
So that confirms what you were saying about the advantages for children, just to feel comfortable in knowing how a book works when they go to school. And that way you were saying that they feel more comfortable when they begin their school. What are some advantages for children who feel comfortable when they first enter a school situation?
When children feel comfortable, they're in that same calm and alert state. They're ready to learn. They also feel a sense of belonging with other children. And some of us refer to that as being part of the literacy club, because they already know some authors. They may have a set of Dr. Seuss books at home where that they've seen, and when they see it at school, you will hear their delight. They'll say, "I know that book. I have that book. I know what's coming next." And they will enjoy hearing it again from a different reader at school. And so that comfort and that association of reading with pleasure means that they can begin to read for themselves if they're not already reading some words by the time they come to kindergarten.
It's also a sense of being a part of society, isn't it? And you've spoken with me about the difficulties for many people, for adults who are struggling with learning to read. And what can you tell us about adults who struggle with literacy? Because there are quite a few in the province.
There are, and our health outcomes are dependent upon literacy. Our ability to provide homes and food and so on are very literacy dependent. And so the parents that I've met in that kind of circumstance don't want their children to have to struggle as they have. They want their children to be able to read. And they don't have to be able to read well themselves in order to help their children learn to read.
This is so true and so comforting to know. One of the things we've also learned from research is the important role of dads in reading to children, especially reading to boys. And Dr. Tom Boyce talks about this in a clip that we're going to take a look at.
It's been wonderful. He wakes her up first thing in the morning. He's the one who looks at her every single day in the morning. He plays with her, he reads a lot to her, and if I'm worked up about work or something like that, he talks to her and tells her that mommy is just worked up because there's something coming up, but she'll be fine soon. So he does a lot of comforting, and that's been great.
Children are little sponges for what they see their parents doing in the life of the family around them. So seeing their dads read is an important influence on their interest in and willingness to acquire the ability to read. Having their fathers read to them is very important, not only emotional interaction, social interaction with their parent, but also cognitively begins to help them understand the pleasure and the fun of reading. A father who cannot read can still interact with that child in ways that are important and helpful to the child. Simply having a children's book and turning the pages and telling whatever story the father wants to tell about the illustrations in that book is a tremendously helpful thing for a little child.
Dr. Tom Boyce just gave us a lot of good information about the role of dads and reading to children. We're with Daphne Macnaughton. Daphne, what are some of the things that you think were important in that video clip that we just saw?
Oh, well, you see the relationship is evident as the parent is reading to the child. There's also the modeling that happens in the home. Reading is something that people do for information, for pleasure, and reading from a book is very different from the kind of reading that some of us do on screens.
Mm. We've had such a rich conversation today. So we've talked about the importance of the early years and that what's happening early on is foundational, and that you can read to babies, you can read to toddlers, and you can read to young children. What about reading to older children?
Reading to older children is something that, or the reading habit is something that's important to continue on with older children. And the reason for that is because they may not be able to read all of the words in the book, but they can understand the story or the information that's being presented. And so again, in the same way, we're extending their knowledge, we are extending the kinds of experiences that they're exposed to. Even at ages 12, 13, 14, we can be engaged in shared reading with them.
I like it when people read to me. I don't know about you.
I do.
This has been really helpful. You also mentioned the importance of a story having a beginning, a middle, and an end. Mm. Why is that important for children to understand?
Because there's completeness to it. It's very satisfying. You know, we always ask people, well, how did it end? In the story of Chrysanthemum, the little mouse who was teased at school, it ended in a very satisfying way. Teachers came to her rescue, and pretty soon all of the children renamed themselves with bigger, longer names.
As with stories that have an ending, our conversation for now has come to an end. Thank you so much for joining us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Estelle.
And thank you for joining us for Conversations with KidCare Canada. If you'd like to find out more about the resources that are available for you, do check out the KidCareCanada.org website, Facebook, Twitter, and remember, we're here to support you on your journey as a parent or as a member of the community who cares about kids.